Hey, truth seekers, ever wonder if those enchanting childhood stories were actually a bit messed up? We grew up with tales of princesses, princes, and the promise of happily ever after. But what if beneath the magic lies a darker psychological pattern? Today, we're diving into the hidden truths and dark psychology lurking in your favorite fairy tales. This isn't about ruining memories. It's about seeing these stories with a critical eye. We'll explore codependency, unhealthy relationships, and why happily ever after might be the most damaging lie of all. Get ready to question the heroes, reevaluate the heroines, and rethink the idea of fairy tale romance. Let's unmask the hidden truths and see these classics in a whole new light. Let's talk codependency, a relationship where one person's self-worth depends entirely on another. Sound familiar? Cinderella waits for rescue, her value defined by being chosen, not by her own actions. Sleeping Beauty is literally passive, her fate sealed until a man awakens her. These stories glorify waiting for a savior, not self-empowerment. Snow White finds purpose only by serving others. Belle sacrifices herself and falls for her captor. The message: losing yourself and seeking external validation is romantic. These aren't just stories, they're blueprints for unhealthy relationships. Codependency is presented as an ideal, not a problem. It's time to see these tales for what they really teach. Why dissect these stories now? Because they've shaped our ideas of love and relationships for generations. Princes rescue, princesses wait, roles we're taught to emulate. Internalizing these scripts leads to disappointment and dysfunction. We wait for someone to complete us, mistaking sacrifice for love. The happily ever after myth ignores the real work of relationships. By understanding codependency, we see how these tales set us up for unhealthy patterns. Our goal: challenge these outdated scripts and reclaim our own narratives. Let's write new stories based on equality, self-worth, and real connection. Fairy tales promise that love is effortless once you find the one. The story ends at the wedding, skipping the real work of partnership. Real relationships are messy, evolving, and require effort. The fairy tale illusion sets us up to see conflict as failure. Cinderella never faces real-life challenges. Sleeping Beauty wakes to a stranger. We measure our lives against a flawless, fictional standard. The myth whispers, if it's hard, it's not true love. Believing this blinds us to the beauty of real, imperfect relationships. Fairy tales glorify passivity, especially in heroines. Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, all rewarded for waiting, not acting. The message: endure suffering, be beautiful, and wait for rescue. This is codependency, outsourcing happiness and self-worth to someone else. The heroine is a blank slate, defined by her rescuer. Dependency is romanticized, creating power imbalances from the start. We're taught to wait for a magic fix, not to solve our own problems. This fantasy leads to learned helplessness and tolerating the intolerable. It's time to build our own ladders and climb out of the tower. Expecting real life to mirror fairy tales leads to disappointment. When reality falls short, we blame ourselves or our partners. The happily ever after myth leaves no room for the ordinary or difficult. Real love is happy for now, requiring effort and commitment. Comparing our lives to fairy tales erodes gratitude and contentment. We judge real partners against fictional perfection. Internalizing these ideals breeds inadequacy and self-doubt. The cruelest lie: chasing an illusion instead of building a real, imperfect life. What's fascinating is that the romanticized interpretation of fairy tales is a modern distortion. The original stories collected by the Brothers Grimm were darker and more complex. These tales were psychological maps of our deepest fears and shadow selves. Through 20th century adaptations, the core message became twisted. Narratives were repackaged as love stories, shifting the focus to a wealthy spouse. This is where the dark psychology takes root in our cultural consciousness. We internalize unhealthy patterns as desirable goals. We need to rediscover the original intent and see them as psychological explorations. Fairy tales often present a damaging picture of love. To understand codependency, we turn to Pia Mellody, an internationally renowned therapist whose insights have revolutionized our understanding of dysfunctional patterns. Her work provides a framework to dissect the behavior of fairy tale characters. In her influential book, she offers a clinical model for identifying codependent thinking, emotions, and behaviors. Mellody argues that codependency stems from growing up in a dysfunctional family environment where a child's emotional needs were not met. This framework unlocks the dark psychology of fairy tales, where heroines often come from backgrounds of neglect and abuse. Pia Mellody's work becomes even more illuminating when we examine her 5 primary symptoms of adult codependency. These are the specific, identifiable traits that manifest as a result of those early childhood wounds. As I list them, try to picture the fairy tale heroines we have been discussing. The first symptom is difficulty experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem, meaning one's self-worth is derived from external sources rather than from an inherent sense of value. The second is difficulty setting functional boundaries, which involves being unable to protect oneself from being controlled or taken advantage of by others, while also struggling not to control others. The third symptom identified by Melody is difficulty owning one's own reality. This means a person struggles to identify and be true to their own thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, often deferring to what others think they should feel or believe. The fourth symptom is difficulty acknowledging and meeting one's own needs and wants, where an individual learns to prioritize the needs of others to an extreme degree, often at their own expense. Finally, the fifth symptom is difficulty experiencing and expressing one's reality in moderation, leading to extreme reactions, either by being overly emotional or by being completely detached and numb. Does this list sound familiar? It should, because these 5 symptoms read like a character profile for almost every classic fairy tale princess. These are the very traits that are not only displayed, but are often glorified and rewarded within the narrative structure. The heroines are celebrated for their lack of ego, their boundless self-sacrifice, and their unwavering focus on the needs of others. Their inability to set boundaries is framed as virtuous patience, their suppression of needs is seen as selfless kindness, and their ultimate reliance on an external rescuer is presented as the romantic ideal, the very definition of finding true love. This is the insidious nature of the fairy tale trap. It takes the symptoms of a painful psychological condition and reframes them as admirable feminine virtues. It teaches us to see codependency not as a wound that needs healing, but as a path to a happily ever after. By romanticizing these dysfunctional patterns, the stories normalize them, encouraging generations to aspire to a state of being that is, according to psychological experts like Melody, fundamentally unhealthy. The fairy tale doesn't just contain codependency, it actively promotes it as a recipe for romantic success, a dangerous and misleading message. Let's look at Cinderella through the lens of codependency. She's a textbook case, her self-esteem, non-existent. Worth is external, defined by abuse, then validated by the prince. No self-love, happiness contingent on being chosen. She doesn't decide, she waits for magic, a core symptom. Boundaries, non-existent. Exploited, abused, treated as a servant. No protest, no defense, no leaving. Helplessness is praised, a symptom of codependency. She's surrendered her rights, dependent on withheld goodwill. She doesn't own her reality, accepting her fate. She doesn't think she deserves better or question injustice. She suppresses her needs. It takes a fairy godmother to voice her desires. Her story is a plea for rescue, the ultimate codependent dynamic. She's not active in her salvation, but a passive recipient. It's not a love story, but a wounded person finding a savior. Let's delve into Sleeping Beauty. Princess Aurora is the ultimate embodiment of passivity. Her existence is put on hold, dependent on a man's intervention. She is cursed to sleep until a stranger arrives to kiss her. She is inert, incapable of action, choice, or contribution to her own destiny. Her story happens to her while she is asleep. This glorification of female powerlessness is dangerous. It reinforces the unhealthy idea that a woman's agency is secondary until activated by a man. Aurora has no voice, no desires, and no part to play in her own rescue. She is a beautiful, silent object, a prize to be won. This is a metaphor for someone who has surrendered their power, whose identity is dormant. The narrative suggests this vulnerability is the prerequisite for her happily ever after. The prince is drawn to her sleeping form, her catalepsy becoming her most attractive feature. The relationship begins with an act of non-consensual contact. Sleeping Beauty teaches a perilous lesson. A woman can be entirely absent and still be deemed worthy of love and rescue.